This is the bundle, and it has a long, dark, and sinister history, one that we'll be diving deep into in just a moment. However, before we can do that, what is this bundle I speak of? Well, the bundle is a mysterious item that has been in Minecraft since 1.17. However, since its creation, it has been hidden away, deep within the game's code, only accessible with commands. That is, until today, because as part of Minecraft 1.20, it is finally possible for anyone to access the bundle without the use of commands. But what does this bundle do? Well, it's a portable storage item that can carry up to 64 items in one inventory slot. Now, hold up, that might sound quite useless, as ordinary block stacks go up to 64. So, on the surface, this bundle seems to have no purpose. But, trust me, that's not the case, as this bundle is different to just an ordinary stack, as the bundle can hold 64 varying blocks all in one slot, which can be very useful when someone wants to build with small quantities of many differing blocks, or when you want to discreetly move stolen items around without being spotted. And so while on the surface this block might seem meaningless, there might actually be a much deeper story to it all. A story that begins millions of years ago. It was a time long before even this ancient civilization existed. It was a time when the only civilizations around lived in the barren, empty deserts. That being said, despite all the struggles that the civilization would have had to endure living in the desert, they were actually quite advanced, as they'd been able to build many large cities, home to tens of thousands, and they did have many complex farms, and were even able to record much of their technological progress. But more importantly to the story today, this civilization had learned how to mine in the vast empty cave networks within their worlds. And so it was due to that this desert civilization became the first intelligent form of life to ever mine ores. But those ores were rare, and so they became very valuable in that civilization, so much so that many would be willing to risk their own lives just for the slight chance of getting a hold of one. And so it's from these high levels of desperation and low levels of success that bandits began to rise, and those bandits were a group of that civilization that had grown to despise their society, and how they, the ordinary citizen, would have to sacrifice their lives just for the possibility of getting one of those gemstones, whilst others would just be born with all of those luxuries, never having to work a day in their lives, and never having to risk their lives. And so those bandits began to steal from the rich. Now, this created quite a problem for the wealthy within that society, as those bandits were very good at their job, as they knew exactly what they wanted and were willing to kill for it. And so because of that, many of the wealthy began to hide their riches within the walls of their homes. But that just wouldn't work, as the bandits would get in and would always find them. And so they began trying to hide their riches in pits in the middle of the desert. But again, that also failed, and so because of that, they began to store all of their riches in vaults. And well, that did work. However, there was a problem with it, as very often, when they sent someone carrying those jewels to go and put them in the vaults, they would be robbed before they could reach their destination. And so, once again, the wealthy would be losing their valuables. But, thankfully, that all came to an end on one midnight during the summer. As it was on that hot night that one of the rich beings, whilst carrying his gemstones to the vault, made a wrong turning and ended up in the central market of his city. This was bad, very bad, as he was now at a very high risk of getting robbed and losing all of his riches. But thankfully, he didn't. Well, not yet anyways, as that wealthy being decided to just act calm and behave just like all the midnight shoppers were. And so because of that, he stopped looking behind him all the time, started to walk at a slower pace, and began taking glances at the stalls as he passed them. And thankfully it was working for a while, as he was blending in with his surroundings. But then he came across a magician who was doing some sort of magic tricks with a cloth. and he was very confused at what he saw, and even though deep down he knew that this magician was likely just a con man, he decided to just watch on, just as many other shoppers were. And what he ended up seeing changed his life forever, as he watched the magician perform a trick where he was somehow able to hide a glowing lime piece of wool behind a cloth and make it disappear. Hold on. That gave him an idea. Maybe he could use that cloth to hide his gems and get them to the vault more safely, as hopefully with that cloth he would never be spotted. And so, thinking that, he waited until the crowd had disappeared around this magician when he went up to him and asked him how this cloth was made. Now, at first, that magician didn't want to say, as he wanted to keep that a secret. But after some persuasion, he spoke up and said,
"Well, it's actually quite simple. All you have to do is to just go out into the desert we live right next to and kill some of those rabbits. And then all you have to do is to steal the hides from their dead bodies. And then after collecting a few of those hides, just connect them all together using some string. And then bam, you now have a rabbit hide bag. Now listen, it's not used by many, but hey, I like it and you wanted to know."
That was interesting. And so it was on their next morning that the wealthy ordered most of their servants to go out and kill some of the rabbits in the desert and steal their hides, and to then attach those hides together with some string to create that bag that the magician was talking about. But once this bag was made, they had to give it a name, because the magician didn't really give it a proper one, and so they decided to call this bag the Bundle, as that sounded quite sophisticated to them, and they all liked it. But even though the bundle had now been made and was given a name, their work wasn't done just yet, as they now had to test if these bags would actually keep their goods safe from theft while moving goods over to the vaults. And so to test that, it was later that day when the sun began to set on the world that a group of 5 of them began to walk around their city centre holding their bundles filled with a lifetime's worth of work of jewels. And thankfully for the wealthy, that test was a success, as they were able to make it to the vaults without being robbed or even talked to once, as the bundles just truly fit in so well in their society. And so it would be over those next few weeks that thousands of these bundles would be made for all of their rich to move their goods into the vaults. But even though this was working extremely well, it wasn't enough. They wanted even more security, as eventually the bandits were going to find out what they were doing and learn that those bundles were hiding so much wealth. And so to stop that from ever happening, the wealthy decided to just release these bundles out in massive quantities to the public so that everyone could have one, and thus their bundles would blend in even more. And well, that plan was a huge success, as theft dropped dramatically to almost 0%. And so all would be good for the wealthy, as now all of their gems were safe. And so that's the story on how the bundle was created and utilized by that society. But its story isn't over just yet, as just a few thousand years later, that desert civilization, the one that had once thrived, was now going through quite a crisis and was very close to collapsing. Now, I'll get into more detail on what happened there later, but for now, all you need to know is the members of that civilization either had to flee the desert or die. And so, most fled. But there was a problem with that, as they just didn't have all that much time, and so if they wanted to flee, they just had to carry whatever they could and run away. And well, those bundles were just deemed not important enough to take with them on their journey, and so because of that, millions of bundles would be left behind in the desert, along with many other relics, mind you. But regardless of all the other relics that were there, they were abandoned, and so because of that, nature would slowly reclaim them, meaning they should have been lost forever. But that was until a few million years later, when the villagers, who were just really beginning to be a thing in the world, somehow found them, as they had somehow stumbled across the largest ruin of that desert civilization whilst they were just travelling across the desert, looking for a place to stay. And so it's because of that they found hundreds of thousands of these broken old bags scattered across this part of the desert. And so they went to investigate. However, at that time, they weren't able to dig any deeper into these ruins. And so because of that, all they were able to collect were the artifacts on the surface. But that was mainly just the bundles, as anything else had already been taken by someone else. And these bundles were probably left because they did just look like worthless pieces of cloth. But despite their somewhat ugly appearance, the villagers loved these bundles and found great use with them. As with these bundles, they were able to collect many different variants of sand, dirt, wood, every small item they could possibly want, all in a very compact way, which was very useful to them when they were travelling all across the world, looking for places to build their villages. And so it'd be in small part thanks to those bundles that life would be able to progress with these villagers for hundreds of years to come, as those bundles had allowed them to save quite some time and bring resources that they would have otherwise have to have left behind with them into their villages. And so everyone was very happy and thankful for the discovery of the bundles. Now, because the villagers had never made the bundles, they had no idea how they were created. They just knew that someone had created them a long time ago and left them in the desert. And so it's because of this strange mystery that they used to play a game with one another, where they would try and create stories about these strange bundles and guess where they had come from. And this was actually quite a common occurrence for the villagers, as sitting in that campfire at night was one of the very few times where they could just all sit down together and just talk. And it was quite interesting for them to make up these weird and random stories, as it was just a break from their normal, monotonous work. However, this period of fun and games wouldn't last for too long, as soon arriving from the peaks of the mountains came the evil pillagers, whom spent the next millennia pillaging, raiding, and destroying their villages and their homes, and even attempting to collapse the villagers' society. Now, this event was devastating for the villagers, as the pillagers would always be able to overpower them, and so they were unable to fight back. And so it wouldn't be too long until millions would be killed, progress would be lost, and control over the world would diminish. Now, this all sounds very bad for the villagers, and well, it was. But for the pillagers, all this was great news, as because of their success over the villagers, they were now growing in population and would be progressing greatly in their technology and were gaining control over the world at a rapid rate. And not only that, they were also making some great discoveries from the items that they had stole from the villagers. And using some reverse engineering, they were even able to work out how the villagers made them and make them for themselves. And so that's how the villagers ended up with items like the glazed terracotta and the wool. They had just reverse engineered items that they had stole from the villagers. However, there was one item that the pillagers just couldn't figure out how the villagers made, and that item was none other than the bundle. And they had tried many different methods to figure out how these villagers made them, from torturing them for answers, but that never worked, as the villagers always refused to talk. To trying to read the villagers' libraries, but there was nothing there about these bundles. And they even tried to rip it apart to see what it was made of, but when they tried to do that, it would just crumble because it was too old. And so they just had no idea what this bundle was made of. And to them, their failure on figuring out what this bundle was a reflection on them failing to conquer over the villagers. And so they were getting quite annoyed, so much so that some of the pillagers took some of these bundles with them and went over to their greatest and most powerful ally, the Evokers, to see if they could figure it out. And, well, thankfully, they could, as the Evokers, using some of their dark magic, were able to rewind time temporarily to see the perspective of the bundle throughout history. But what they ended up seeing shock them and would change the course of history for the entire overworld. As these evokers witnessed an ancient desert civilization harvesting rabbits and then using their hides to make this bundle, they were shocked. Not only because they had just found out that the rabbit hides, which for a long time were thought of as just completely and utterly useless, had a purpose, but also the fact that there was once a civilization that they had never heard of in the desert, making them. As, to their knowledge, the only civilization that had ever existed before this point was the ancient civilization in the deep dark, but this had just disproved everything that they had thought. And so because of that, quickly news spread of that discovery all across the Illager world, and it wasn't too long before groups of villagers began to prepare to go out and learn more about this strange civilization that had created the bundles. As surely if they'd been able to create these bundles, which were very useful at carrying resources, they must have left behind other grand pieces of technology. And so it was with that they began to march into the desert, and when they arrived at what they thought were ruins, they began using some of their spells, and with that they were quickly able to reveal some other strange artifacts that were hidden under the ground. However, for the most part, all they found were really just broken shards of lost potteries and other empty bundles. It seems that maybe that civilization just didn't create anything else. And so that evoker, the same one that casted that spell on the bundle to see its past, began casting another spell to see the history of this place, which would hopefully help them uncover its secrets. But all he saw was this.
We can rebuild from this.
And so, after seeing that, the evoker told everyone around him what he saw. And well, everyone was scared. As, what was that creature? And what were those books doing in that cave? The answer to that first question remains today as an unknown for the Illagers. As for that second question though, well, after making a few more discoveries at other desert ruins, they came to the conclusion that after they had fled from the deserts, that old civilization created a brand new civilization, one that we know today as the Ancient Civilization, and was the same group that created the ancient cities. But over time, that civilization had learned some dark magic, more evil and twisted than even the Illagers knew, and they had written books on all these dark magic spells that they had discovered and were using. And well, they assumed after that something must have gone wrong with one of their spells, and so, because of that, they died out. But before being completely wiped away, a few of them hid the bookshelves containing all of their dark magic knowledge in a cave far away, where they might still be today. Now, many of the Illagers wanted those books, as with them, the Illagers would likely become the greatest civilization ever known to the overworld, as if that old civilization could create that monster, then who knows what the Illagers could do. However, no one would ever find those books, and so for now, they just had to be content with the bundles, as they were the only parts of ancient history that they could ever have. Well, that was until one day when the evoker found those books, and well, life changed forever after that. But to learn about that, you'll need to watch this video.